The Titanic disaster was not an accident. It was the result of a business strategy. The Iceberg was just the final invoice for a series of decisions made years before the ship ever touched water. We think of the Titanic as a story of engineering failure or human error. A tragic encounter between ice and steel on a cold, dark night. But the truth is more complex. The ship that was famously unsinkable sank because of a deliberate corporate strategy. A strategy of opulence, perception, and a fatal dose of arrogance. To understand this, we need to go back to the turn of the 20th century. The transatlantic passenger route was the most lucrative and competitive shipping lane in the world. It was dominated by two British rivals, the Cunard Line and the White Star Line. Cunard had the edge. Its two new ships, the Lusitania and Mauretania, were marvels of speed. They were so fast, they held the Blue Riband, the award for the fastest Atlantic crossing. They were also subsidized by the British government, giving them an almost unbeatable advantage. White Star Line, controlled by the American financier J.P. Morgan, couldn't compete on speed. So its chairman, J. Bruce Ismay, made a pivotal strategic decision. If they couldn't be the fastest, they would be the biggest and the most luxurious. They would build a new class of vessel, the Olympic-class liners. These ships would be floating palaces. They would offer a level of comfort and grandeur never before seen at sea. And their core marketing message, their unique selling proposition, was a potent combination of luxury and ultimate safety. So how did this strategy, a strategy built on the promise of security, lead directly to the greatest maritime disaster in modern history? How did the very brand they were building become their undoing? That's the strategic failure we are unlocking today. The Olympic-class project was a direct response to Cunard. The strategy was clear: change the conversation from speed to experience. White Star Line would make the journey itself the destination. The Titanic was the crown jewel of this strategy. It featured a grand staircase, a swimming pool, Turkish baths, a squash court, and palatial suites. For first-class passengers, it was less like a ship and more like the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. This was a brilliant market differentiation. They targeted the wealthiest travelers, for whom a few extra hours at sea didn't matter if those hours were spent in unparalleled luxury. The press at the time wasn't focused on the ship's engines, but on its amenities. The marketing also heavily emphasized its engineering. The ship was constructed with 16 watertight compartments. It was designed to stay afloat even if the first 4 of these compartments were completely flooded. This led the popular press, and even the shipping journals, to label it practically unsinkable. White Star Line never corrected them. This perception of invincibility became the cornerstone of their brand. The strategy was working perfectly. They had created a product that was not just a means of transport, but a symbol of progress, wealth, and safety. But this is where the strategy began to curdle into arrogance. Behind the marketing, a series of critical compromises were made. Each compromise prioritized the brand's image of luxury and grandeur over genuine, fail-safe safety. The first and most infamous compromise was the lifeboats. The Titanic was designed to carry up to 64 lifeboats. This would have been more than enough for every single person on board. The davits, the cranes used to lower the boats, were designed for this capacity. However, the ship sailed with only 20. This provided space for just 1,178 people, roughly 1/3 of the ship's total capacity on its maiden voyage. Why? The decision was twofold. First, according to the law, it was technically legal. The British Board of Trade's regulations were hopelessly outdated. They were based on a ship's tonnage, and hadn't been updated for vessels the size of the Titanic. So, legally, they only needed to carry 16 lifeboats. But the real reason was branding. A deck cluttered with 64 lifeboats would ruin the aesthetic. It would spoil the long, elegant promenade decks where first-class passengers could stroll. It suggested the possibility of disaster, which contradicted the unsinkable marketing message. More boats meant less luxury. So, a calculated risk was taken. The brand came first. The second critical compromise lay deep within the ship's hull, the watertight bulkheads. These were the steel walls that created the 16 watertight compartments. They were the very technology that made the ship unsinkable. But they had a fatal design flaw. The walls did not extend high enough. They were not capped at the top. Most of the bulkheads only went up to E-deck. This was another compromise. Building them higher would have interrupted the grand, open spaces of the first-class dining rooms and lounges on the decks above. It would have made the ship feel less like a palace and more like a series of enclosed boxes. The ship's designers, including Thomas Andrews, knew this was a vulnerability. They understood that if the ship listed or tilted, water from a flooded compartment could spill over the top of the bulkhead into the next one, and then the next, like water filling an ice cube tray. But the risk was deemed acceptable. The probability of damaging more than 4 compartments was considered so infinitesimally small that it was ignored. The strategy of luxury dictated the engineering, not the other way around. A flawed strategy can be survivable. But when it's executed with arrogance, it becomes lethal. The decisions made during the Titanic's maiden voyage show a company that had become dangerously overconfident. The chairman of the White Star Line, J. Bruce's May, was on board. His presence created immense pressure to make the maiden voyage a publicity success. Evidence from the British inquiry suggests May pressured Captain Edward Smith to maintain high speed. Why? They were hoping to beat the crossing time of their sister ship, the Olympic, and arrive in New York ahead of schedule. An early arrival would generate glowing headlines, reinforcing the brand's prestige. This was a marketing objective, not an operational one. So, they sailed at 22 knots, near maximum speed, into a region where they had received multiple, specific warnings of sea ice. Over the course of April 14th, the day of the collision, the Titanic's radio operators received at least 7 severe ice warnings from other ships in the area. One message from the ship Masaba pinpointed a massive field of ice directly in the Titanic's path. That warning never even made it to the bridge. The radio operators, employed by Marconi and not White Star Line, were busy sending private telegrams for the wealthy first-class passengers. It was a more profitable use of their time. The final warning came less than an hour before impact, from the SS Californian, which had stopped for the night because it was surrounded by ice. The message was blunt: "We are stopped and surrounded by ice." The Titanic's exhausted radio operator, Jack Phillips, replied, "Shut up. I am busy." This wasn't just negligence. It was a symptom of a corporate culture that believed itself to be above the risks that plagued lesser vessels. They had the best technology, the most experienced captain, and a ship that was practically unsinkable. The warnings were treated as advisories, not as urgent threats. The strategy of perceived invincibility had infected every level of decision-making. And here is the core strategic failure. The sinking of the Titanic wasn't caused by any single flaw. It was caused by the collision of a physical iceberg with a strategic iceberg. White Star Line's strategy was not to sell safety. It was to sell the perception of safety. It was to sell an idea of luxury so complete that it implied invincibility. Every critical decision was made to serve this perception. Reducing the lifeboats was done to enhance the perception of luxury. Compromising the bulkheads was done to enhance the perception of space and grandeur. Maintaining high speed through an ice field was done to enhance the perception of performance and prestige. The leaders of the White Star Line, from the boardroom to the bridge, had become victims of their own marketing. They believed the story they were telling the world. They thought the brand was so powerful, the engineering so advanced, that it could overcome real-world, physical risk. The ship did not sink despite its strategy. The ship sank because of its strategy. The very elements designed to make it a marketing triumph, its size, its opulence, its unsinkable reputation, created a culture of arrogance that made the disaster not just possible, but inevitable. If you're having that aha moment right now, learning something you didn't know about this historic event, take a second to support the channel. Hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the strategies that shape our world. The lesson from the Titanic is not about lifeboats or bulkheads. It's a timeless business principle. It's about the profound danger of allowing a company's marketing narrative to dictate its operational reality. We see echoes of this strategic arrogance all the time. Think of the financial firms before the 2008 crash, who believed their models were too sophisticated to fail. Think of Boeing and the 737 MAX, where pressure to compete with Airbus led to engineering compromises and a culture that sidelined safety concerns. Think of Theranos, a company built entirely on a marketing story that had no basis in reality. These are all modern Titanics. They are case studies in what happens when the story becomes more important than the substance. The ultimate business principle is this: risk management must always be independent of brand management. When you start cutting corners on safety, engineering, or ethics to protect a marketing image, you are sailing directly into the ice field. Because the market, just like the ocean, is unforgiving. And reality always wins in the end. If you learn something new, hit the like button and subscribe for more strategy breakdowns. And let us know in the comments, what company's strategy should we unlock next?